The wind blows hard in the desert. The sky, painted in red, announces the arrival of something monumental. The imaginary camera draws closer to an ancient rock, where names long forgotten are carved into stone. Silence. Only the sound of sand being dragged by centuries. And then, a voice. They were there. Women who defied empires, who stood tall in the face of the impossible, who became protagonists in a book written by men for a world led by men. But they were silenced, erased. And today, we're bringing them back into the light. You know the stories. Moses parted the sea. David defeated the giant. Peter walked on water. But what about the women? Where were they when the world turned upside down? Hiding in the shadows, or working miracles while no one was paying attention? What you're about to hear is not just a biblical narrative, it's a call to remember, a call to truth. Because the Bible, though written in patriarchal times, carries within its lines the echo of female voices that resisted being erased from history. How many women can you name from the Bible? Eve, Mary, Sarah, maybe Ruth, and then silence. But there are names that defied kings, saved nations, and left a mark on the history of faith and humanity. Midwives who stood up to Pharaoh, prophetesses who guided kings, foreigners who became ancestors of the Messiah. Invisible heroines who weren't highlighted, not because of a lack of deeds, but because the world wasn't ready to see them. But now it is, and you're about to meet them. This video is more than just content. It's a rescue mission, a rescue of stories buried beneath centuries of forgetfulness. Women like Jael, who defeated a general with her own hands. Like Tamar, who faced injustice head-on. Like Rizpah, who stood against death with dignity and moved a king's heart. They were there, written between the lines of the Bible, waiting to be remembered, not as side characters, but as protagonists of epic deeds. You may have never heard of Shiphrah and Puah, but they stood up to the most powerful empire in the world to save innocent lives. Maybe you've never heard of Huldah, but her prophecy shaped the destiny of a nation. These are not side stories. They are the beating heart of a narrative that has always belonged to everyone, but one that many have only told halfway. And if you've come this far, it's because you're ready to hear the other half. This journey won't be easy. It will challenge what you think you know. It will shake certainties. It will make you look at the Bible with new eyes, eyes that are more attentive, more just, more awakened. Because faith isn't only made of great male leaders. Faith was shaped by women who, even without a spotlight, kept the flame of hope alive. And today, we're going to reignite that flame. We're going to name the forgotten ones. We're going to honor every silenced story. Before we go on, I want to invite you to do something. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, like this video now, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, not out of obligation, but because you know there's power in remembering. Share it with someone who needs to see the Bible from a new perspective, because what was forgotten might be exactly what we need to awaken something deep inside us. Now, take a deep breath. The desert is about to reveal its secrets. The voices time tried to silence are about to be heard, and the truth will finally be told. Since the very beginning, the biblical narrative has been driven by grand events, divine revelations, and unforgettable characters. But behind the main curtain, there has always been a quiet force holding up kings, prophets, and priests, women. They were mothers of nations, advisors to rulers, guardians of the faith. And yet, most of these women were treated as background figures, as if they were merely there to complete someone else's story. But what if we told you that many of them were actually the invisible pillars of everything that was built? In ancient Hebrew culture, a woman's role was often confined to the family and the home. Still, even within those boundaries, Scripture shows us that they broke through barriers. The pages of the Bible are full of women who acted with wisdom, bravery, and leadership. Sarah, the woman who waited for a promise. Hannah, who prayed until she gave birth to a prophet. Deborah, who judged Israel with discernment. These are some of the well-known ones, but what about the others? The ones who didn't get the same attention? Why were their stories left behind? While Eve is remembered for standing beside Adam and Mary for being the mother of the Savior, there's a multitude of other women who shaped the story of salvation through acts of unshakable faith. The truth is, the role of women in the Bible was never passive. They weren't just watching events unfold. They were making them happen. They made bold decisions, changed the course of nations, protected lives, revealed divine will. And still, so many were forgotten in the halls of religious tradition. A lack of spotlight doesn't mean a lack of significance. The virtuous woman from Proverbs 31 is not an unattainable ideal. She reflects a reality lived by countless women throughout Scripture. Women who nurtured, led, taught, served, and even fought in battle. Jesus himself, during his time on earth, broke cultural and religious norms to elevate the worth of women. He spoke with Samaritans, forgave adulterers, was anointed by sinners, and was followed by loyal female disciples all the way to the cross, when many men had already run away. When we turn to the New Testament, we see that same pattern continue. Priscilla taught alongside her husband. Lydia opened her home so the gospel could flourish. Mary Magdalene was the first witness to the resurrection. These women weren't just present, they were leading the way. But how many sermons have you heard about them? How often have their names been honored with the same intensity as Paul's or Peter's? It's time to rewrite that narrative. It's time to look at the Bible for what it really is, a book where women were also key players. And maybe the most powerful lesson of all is this: the women of the Bible were never just side characters. They were vital pieces in God's plan. They acted with wisdom, courage, and faith in the face of adversity. And even if their names weren't written in books or celebrated with proper honor, eternity already knows them. Now, it's up to us to reclaim their stories, to give them the space they've always deserved, to let them shine with the light they've always carried. And with that spirit, we continue this journey. Because once we understand that women have always been essential to the story of faith, we're ready to meet the ones who were forgotten, erased, overlooked, but never defeated. The next step in our exploration takes us straight to them. Women of courage, wisdom, and action. Protagonists who faced down empires, challenged kings, and changed the course of history with their choices. The scene now shifts. We leave theory behind and step into the hidden paths of action. The women you're about to meet weren't just side characters in history. They were agents of change, silent strategists, voices of resistance in times of darkness. They stood against not only the cultural and religious pressures of their time, but also empires, rulers, and systems that tried to silence them. Their names may not be well known, but their deeds still echo with power today. Get ready to meet the women who rewrote the course of biblical history with courage and wisdom. It all begins in Egypt. Pharaoh had issued a terrible decree. All newborn Hebrew boys were to be killed. The order was clear, lethal, non-negotiable. But two women stood up. Shiphrah and Puah, Hebrew midwives, feared God more than they feared Egypt's king. They defied the highest authority of their time and chose to preserve innocent lives. What might seem like a simple act of disobedience was, in truth, a quiet act of war. They didn't wield swords, but they altered the destiny of an entire people. And the story of Moses begins precisely because of these women's boldness. Fast forward in time, and we meet Huldah. Few know her name, but her impact was immense. During the reign of young King Josiah, a discovery was made in the temple. The book of the law, forgotten for generations, had been found. And who was called upon to interpret its meaning? Not a priest, not a scribe, but a woman. Huldah was a prophetess. And it was her interpretation, her voice, that guided a national spiritual reform across the kingdom of Judah. Huldah didn't just speak God's will, she proclaimed it before kings and counselors. A woman leading a nation. Then, in a scene worthy of an epic, we meet Jael. The enemy commander Sisera was fleeing the battlefield. Exhausted and desperate, he sought refuge in a woman's tent. Jael welcomed him with kindness, but in the stillness of night, with precision and resolve, she acted. She drove a tent peg through his head and ended the terror that had haunted Israel. Jael wasn't a trained warrior. She was an ordinary woman. But in that moment, she became judge, warrior, and deliverer in a single strike. Her name echoed in songs of victory, a feat even armies couldn't achieve. These three stories are not isolated events. They form a mosaic of resistance, where each woman becomes a symbol of a greater struggle. Shiphrah and Puah teach us that courage isn't about weapons, it's about conviction. Huldah reveals that wisdom and spiritual insight are not bound by gender. And Jael shows us that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the boldness of the least expected. These stories prove that even when society pushed them to the margins, these women found ways to stand at the center of God's unfolding plan. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't seek recognition. They acted when it was necessary. They risked everything to fulfill a greater purpose. And today, even though their names are barely remembered, their actions remain recorded in the most read book in the world. So why do so few talk about them? Why aren't their stories part of the great biblical narratives we've heard since childhood? Maybe because tales of female courage still challenge the structures of power. Maybe because remembering their existence is an act of resistance in itself. But now, they're back. In every word spoken here, they rise again with strength, not as shadows of a forgotten past, but as beacons of an unbreakable legacy. And the most amazing part, their stories aren't over, because in the next chapter, we'll dive even deeper into the unread pages of the Bible. We'll meet women who were wronged, yet still left legacies that cross generations. Injustice carries a weight that marks the soul. It crushes, silences, and erases. And yet, some people refuse to be defined by the pain they've endured. Throughout the pages of the Bible, there are women who were victims of cruel systems, betrayed by those they trusted, ignored by society. But they didn't stop there. They turned their pain into strength, their humiliation into purpose. They didn't just survive, they left behind a legacy that still echoes today. This is the part of the story no one wanted to tell. But now, at last, it will be revealed. We begin with Tamar, a woman whose story is marked by betrayal and silence. She married Judah's son, but after her husband died, she was cast aside. Ignored by a family system that owed her protection. Time passed, promises made to her were broken, until Tamar took her destiny into her own hands. With boldness and strategy, she confronted Judah and forced him to face his failure. Tamar didn't just reclaim her dignity, she became part of Jesus' genealogy. A woman once dismissed who became a key figure in the Messiah's lineage. Next, we move to an even more anonymous figure, a young girl, a servant, no name, no status, no voice. She worked in the household of a powerful Syrian commander, Naaman. He was respected, influential, but leprous, and it was this girl, enslaved in a foreign land, who pointed the way to healing. She spoke of a prophet in Israel, a simple suggestion that completely changed her master's story. What if she had remained silent? What if bitterness had overtaken her heart? Her choice proved that even the smallest gestures can shift entire destinies, and that even in the most invisible position, God can use someone to work miracles. And then we come to Rizpah, a mother, a woman whose sons were unjustly executed. She didn't scream, didn't set cities on fire, didn't rally crowds. She stayed, day and night, guarding the bodies of her children so they wouldn't be devoured by animals. Her silent grief, her maternal perseverance moved King David's heart. And because of her, he finally gave a proper burial not only to her sons, but also to the bones of Saul and Jonathan. Rizpah changed the course of a nation through sorrow. She teaches us that even mourning can become a form of justice. These stories aren't easy to hear. They hurt. They force us to confront harsh realities that once existed and still do. Women who were pushed aside, silenced, ignored, but who refused to let their souls die with their injustices. They responded, they resisted, and more than anything, they left marks that no forgetting can erase. They weren't just victims, they were survivors who turned scars into testimonies of faith. In a world where women were treated as property, they dared to live with dignity. Tamar challenged a corrupted family structure. Naaman's servant girl used her voice when everyone expected her silence. Rizpah turned pain into protest and made a king change his course. Each of them, in her own way, showed that real faith doesn't ignore suffering. It walks through it. And when these stories are brought back to life, they don't just rescue the past, they reveal how much we still have to learn. Now, after diving deep into so much pain transformed into purpose, it's time to turn to another group of women who carried yet another burden, that of not belonging to the people of Israel. Foreigners, looked at with suspicion, rejected by culture, and yet welcomed by God. Get ready to discover how unlikely women became pillars in the story of salvation. On the margins of Israel's tradition and national identity, there were women who bore the double weight of exclusion, for being women and for being foreigners. Looked upon with suspicion, kept at a distance, judged by their origins. And yet, some of these women broke through every cultural and religious barrier and became part of the very lineage of the Messiah. They proved that God doesn't choose based on nationality, status, or appearance. He chooses hearts that are willing. And through them, the story of redemption gained unexpected and powerful new dimensions. The first is Rahab, a prostitute, a Canaanite, a natural enemy of Israel, but also a woman of vision. When the Hebrew spies arrived in Jericho, Rahab hid them, not out of fear, but out of faith. She recognized the God of Israel before she even became part of his people. While an entire city prepared to resist, she prepared to believe. Because of her boldness, her household was spared, her family saved, and her lineage blessed. Rahab didn't just survive, she became part of the genealogy of Jesus, a foreigner, a prostitute, transformed into the mother of kings. Next, we meet Ruth, a Moabite, a widow, a foreigner. She had lost everything, yet chose not to abandon her mother-in-law. "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God," she said. That statement changed not just her destiny, it changed the history of Israel. Ruth worked the fields, earned respect, and in time married Boaz. From that union came Obed, father of Jesse, father of David. Once again, a woman far from the expected path finds herself at the center of the story, not by force, but through faithfulness and love. Ruth shows us that a covenant with God goes beyond origin. It's sealed in the heart. And then, a scene from the New Testament. A Syrophoenician woman approaches Jesus. She wasn't Jewish. She had no right to the blessing. But she insisted. She pleaded for her daughter. And when tested with harsh words, she replied with faith and wisdom, "Even the little dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." At that response, Jesus didn't just heal her daughter, he was amazed. Yes, the Messiah was amazed by the faith of a foreign woman, a moment that shifted the course of religious exclusivity. Salvation would no longer be a privilege, it would become an open invitation to the world. These women are living proof that God's grace crosses every border. Rahab, Ruth, and the Syrophoenician woman weren't born among the chosen, but they chose to believe. They chose to act. They chose to stay. They show us that the story of salvation was never written only by those within the house of Israel, but also by those bold enough to knock on the door, and God opened it. Now, we move into an even deeper layer of silence. The stories that survived, but whose names were lost. Women who shaped destinies, yet whose identities were erased by the dust of time. Are you ready to meet the nameless voices? Within the pages of the Bible, there are complete stories with no names, faces erased, voices without signatures, women who shaped the path of salvation, yet whose identities were left behind, as if time itself had decided they didn't deserve to be remembered. And yet, they were there, living, acting, choosing. They were part of the most critical moments in the biblical narrative, but the world chose to forget them. Today, we will hear them again, not through the names we don't know, but through the deeds that cannot be ignored. Noah's wife. No one knows her name. Not a single word of hers is recorded, but think about it. She entered the ark, faced the flood, survived the end of the old world. She watched everything be destroyed and everything begin again. She was the mother of a new humanity, a pillar of rebuilding, a witness to the world's rebirth. And still, her story was left without a voice. Who was she? How did she endure the chaos? The Bible's silence about her identity doesn't diminish her significance. It simply challenges us to see the invisible, because what was left unsaid also speaks. Pharaoh's daughter, an Egyptian princess raised among the gods of the Nile. But when she saw a Hebrew baby floating in a basket, she chose to act against everything she had been taught. She could have turned away, she could have reported it, but instead, she took him in, raised him, protected him, saved him. Moses, the deliverer of Israel, only had a chance to live because this unnamed woman dared to defy an empire. Without her, there would be no exodus, no liberation. A woman from within the system who used her position to preserve life. A silent voice that changed the course of humanity. And in the New Testament, something even more intriguing. The apostles, sent out by Jesus, traveled through cities and villages. But in many of these missions, they were not alone. They were accompanied by their wives, women who served, walked beside them, supported the ministry. Paul briefly mentions this fact, but no names are given. How many times did these women care for the needy, feed the disciples, endure persecution, were imprisoned, killed? We don't know, but we do know they were there. And their absence from the official records doesn't erase the impact of what they did. These unnamed women represent thousands more who lived and still live. Women who uphold communities, intercede in silence, work behind the scenes of faith. They show us that glory doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes the greatest heroism is staying faithful even when no one is watching, even when your story is told without you in it. And now that we've unearthed these silent voices, we reach the peak of this journey. It's time to close our investigation with a question that cannot be ignored. If these women were so important, why were they forgotten? We've reached the end of this journey. A journey that spanned centuries, challenged traditions, and threw open the silence of the Bible's forgotten pages. We uncovered women who dared to say no to empire, who advised kings, who saved nations, who loved with unwavering loyalty, who wept in silence, but left behind eternal legacies. And now, one unavoidable question remains. If these women played such crucial roles, why were their stories forgotten? The answer may not lie solely in the scriptures, but in the filters used throughout history to interpret them. For centuries, tradition chose to highlight heroes, not heroines, prophets, not prophetesses. But the Bible was always there, faithfully recording the deeds of these women, even when the world tried to bury them. They were there, not as side characters, but as the invisible pillars holding up the story of faith. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. True protagonists don't need a stage to make history. They act when no one is watching. They transform the world with quiet gestures. They stand firm even when the world insists on ignoring them. The Bible, when read with care, shows us that greatness isn't in the titles, it's in the actions. And these women, with or without names, with or without recognition, changed everything. Now that you've heard these stories, nothing can remain the same. because this isn't just about honoring the past, it's about rethinking the present. How many female voices are still being ignored in churches, in families, in spiritual leadership? How many Tamars, how many Ruths, how many Rizpahs are among us today, simply waiting to be heard? The Bible is a living book, and these stories continue to echo through every woman who refuses to be silenced. If this video revealed something new to you, if it sparked even a flicker of reflection, like it now and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And most of all, share this video with someone who needs to see the Bible through a different lens. And in the comments, tell us, which of these stories surprised you the most? Which of these women left a mark on you? Because remembering is resistance. And by remembering these forgotten women, we are writing a new chapter, one where no one gets left behind.